Mayor Pro Tem McDonald, can you hear us?
Oh, I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can. Thank
Excellent.
you.
That's good by me. All right, let's do this. All right, now call to order the January 30th, 2024 special meeting of the Board of Trustees, time being 6:29 PM. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Clerk, make it a roll call, please.
Excuse me. Trustee Daly,
Present.
trustee Teets,
Here.
trustee Mason,
Here.
trustee Gator,
Here.
trustee Wiegand,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald,
Here.
Mayor Shosse.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any amendments to the agenda this evening?
So I'd like to amend the agenda to add a board report for trustee Daly and I can report out on our meeting with the citizens about animal control and then board discussion around that.
Perfect. Make it a second.
Second.
Ms. Clerk, make it a roll call, please.
Trustee Gator,
Yes.
trustee Teets,
Yes.
trustee Mason,
Yes.
trustee Daly,
Yes.
trustee Wiegand,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald,
Yes.
Mayor Shosse.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously and the agenda will be amended. I would recommend making that item D for reports, Mayor Shosse, and then adjournment as item E.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Are there any conflicts of interest on the agenda this evening? No. All right, now it's time for public comment. Members of the public wishing to speak on non-agenda items, please sign the sheet, state your name for the record, and you'll be given 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Karen Eifert. I live in the Knolls, and I'm here to talk about what happened to me the last time I came into this building. So the whole board knows that I have PTSD. I've referred to it before. And this board sent out the male treasurer on the board to come out and tell, I'm sorry, male clerk, not treasurer, sorry, to come out into the hallway, walk up behind my back, and in a strong voice say, "You need to leave the building." With my PTSD, that's fight or flight for me. There's no fleeing for me. I'm a stay put. You can't make me move anywhere. And it was not against the law for me to stay in the building. Although somebody said there is some site from way back that needs to be attended to on the ruling of that, but it hasn't been attended to. It just gets pushed aside anyway. But let me say this, I'm allowed to make an accommodation request for anything that I need accommodating for. I can't just walk out that door in the middle of the night when I know that there's a meeting going on in here. If I'm here, then I usually think there's something going on and I worry for my friend. So I stay here and I make sure she's okay. That's something in my brain that is just there and I can't stop that. So when I make the accommodation, I would like the whole town to know that this man was sent out again. And the second time he said to me, "The mayor said explicitly for you to get out of the building, Karen." So with more aggression, he came out the second time. I'm here to tell you, I won't be bullied by the mayor. I won't be bullied by this panel, the staff members, any of you. If you want to be so bold as to do so, then I will have Larimer County Sheriff's Department come and talk with you and I together, because that is harassment. And I do have disabilities and I don't have to explain them to you, but I can talk to the sheriff and tell him anytime I want to. And there is no reason that there should not be an accommodation made, but I'll fill out the form and give it to Kelly Hodling like I'm supposed to. But if it's turned down, rest assured, I'll go to the next level and that'll be at the county. I'm not going to be bullied by anyone on this panel. So take it into your heads that you are not the boss of me. You're the boss of you.
Thank you. All right, no more further public comment. Mr. Clerk, will you please read the title of item C1?
C1, resolution number 07-2024, approving an agreement with NOCO Humane for animal welfare services effective February 1, 2024 to March 31, 2024.
Thank you. Mr. Cody Bird, the Director of Planning, will present this item.
Thank you, Mayor. Cody Bird, Planning Director. Presenting to you, I'll keep it really brief tonight. Just a quick kind of background. It's in your packet as well. We brought forth an item at the January 23rd meeting for a joint agreement with NOCO Humane, including Berthoud and Timnath as partners in that agreement for sharing of animal control services and sharing of costs. There were some questions that came up around that. There was a desire to get some additional community input and conversations on the subject matter. Excuse me. And so the board didn't take action at the January 23rd meeting. They tabled it, or you tabled it to February. The board also received a notice from NOCO Humane that the previous contract that we had with them for animal control services for backup, that they had terminated that. You received that termination letter in December. And those services are ending January 31st. Since the board hasn't had an opportunity to take formal action on an agreement or other type of form of animal control services, we felt it was prudent to ask NOCO Humane if they would offer something as a means to cover the gap until such time as the town could consider and take additional actions as needed. So what's in your packet tonight is a temporary agreement with NOCO Humane, and it is to provide backup animal control services at a fee schedule that is identified in that the agreement contract. And it's for a period beginning February 1st, which is this week, Thursday, through the end of March 31st. So it's a very short term, kind of cover the gap type of contract to ensure that the town has animal control services until we decide what the right path is for the future of animal control services. So I'm trying to keep it brief, but I'm happy to answer any questions regarding the presentation or the contract.
Thank you. Trustee Gator.
Yep, so thank you for bringing this together. I only had one question, and that was it's on item number 8, which is enforcement. And so it does say that NOCO Humane will provide enforcement only at the town's request. Can you walk me through what would a situation be where we are asking NOCO Humane to provide the enforcement piece? Not, I understand dealing with an animal, things like that, but the enforcement, to me, that's writing the summons, that's whatever. What situation would we need them to do that could not be handled either by our code enforcement officer or by LCSO?
Thanks, Trustee Gator. So I'm not going to pretend to every type of scenario that might come up in those circumstances, but a couple of examples could be vicious dog, dog at large, containing an animal during a police or fire event. If they're on scene, handling that situation to remove an emergency, remove a stray animal in a dangerous situation, if they're involved in as a witness to a dog bite, other things of that nature, we would need them to be on call and continue through with enforcement on the pieces that they were already involved in. And there will definitely be some partnering between animal control, town, LCSO as appropriate to resolve each of those needs. But there are instances that would come up where if they're on scene and engaged, they would need to continue and follow through with their pieces of that.
So would they be, so for give an example, right, vicious animal, so I'm assuming very likely, let's just say LCSO is involved. Would NOCO Humane, even though, yes, they might be coming to deal with the vicious animal, but do they need to be the ones writing the summons, or would LCSO be the one writing the summons? Because to me, enforcement is they're writing the summons. I understand we might need them to witness, we might need their statement and things like that, but to me, that's not enforcement. That's a part of our process, but they're not actually enforcing it. They're just simply acting as a witness. So I'm trying to understand where they have to be the enforcement. I understand they would handle the animal, but even if it's a case of LCSO is not involved, if they handle the animal, we can have our code enforcement officer write the summons. That's the piece I'm trying to understand, where we need them to write the summons. I understand we need them to manage the animal. I'm good with that. It's just, I'd prefer that we have either our code enforcement officer, who's a town employee, write the summons, or our LCSO, who is the police force for this area that goes through extensive training to be the ones that are writing the summonses and not spread that out to another. But I don't understand. I don't know all the cases here. So that's why I'm trying to understand because my preference would be just to strike that enforcement piece out, but I don't know if there's covering something else that we're not aware of that needs to be in there.
Yeah, So I think throughout the night, there's some other discussion topics that may come up, and I definitely want to take notes of all those. And part of my objective for tonight is understanding community desires, board direction, all those things. And there's a lot of how we implement, how we enforce and do the things that we do at a staff level that we can take that direction and guidance on. I think that's a great topic that you're bringing up for what is the desire of the community, what is the direction of the board on some of these instances. And I think some other examples for where enforcement might be appropriate in those examples could be after hours, if it's middle of the night and they're on scene. Town staff, code enforcement officer's not going to be able to respond to that, until the next day, earliest, weekends. LCSO would maybe be able to assist in some of those instances. You're still calling in additional personnel to do something that someone's already on scene to handle. So there's definitely, a whole lot of scenarios, and I don't want to play a scenarios game,
Okay.
but there are instances where it makes sense for the person who's already on site, on scene, on call to have the ability to pursue those things in obvious situations, as opposed to wait, spend time, bring in additional people to do a task that could have already been accomplished.
Got it.
But I know that's a broad answer.
So if my
Um,
understanding corrected the way the contract will work, something gets brought to the town's attention, whether it's through LCSO or someone calls staff, we have this need for an animal. So we have to be notified. Then we have to then call NOCO Humane, and then they would have to come up. They're not just going to be here. They would have to actually come at our request. So my thought process at that point, if it's after hours, unless it comes from LCSO, it's not coming from the town until business hours because we're not here. So we might get the notification in the middle of the night, but we're not doing anything about it till business hours. So at that point, the code enforcement officers are going to be here unless they're out sick or something like that. So I would assume they would be there on scene as well as NOCO Humane. It wouldn't just be, okay, you go deal with this, code enforcement's not. So I want to make sure that it's not going to be something where it's like, okay, hey, this person's dog is running around, go write a summons or something like that. If we're dealing with that stuff, I want to make sure that we're dealing with that as the town, not.
Can I address that a little bit as well? This contract from NOCO Humane, they provided this to us. They made it very clear that this was intended to be a backup contract. And really, they wouldn't offer this contract.
Sure.
And they won't offer this contract to us again.
Yes.
Unless the town has an active animal control program, right?
Sure.
So we would need to have our own enforcement program in place normally. So
Right.
the way I read this provision, and I did kind of go through it quite a bit, thinking that you would probably have this question, knowing you pretty well at this point. 8A says they will provide enforcement when the town is unable to. So
Okay.
it starts with the town can't do it for whatever reason.
Okay.
And it says, and they will only do it when it's requested in advance.
Okay.
By the town. So there was a million scenarios where this
Sure.
might happen, but it's hard to, even though there are so many, it's hard to kind of pinpoint one, but maybe some big event happened and the town said, oh no.
Okay.
We're in a crisis. We can't do this. We would have to reach out under this. All of A through E are ands. So
Okay.
we have to be unable to provide it. We have to request it in advance. It has to be requested by the town so I think you're concerned about them just being in the town enforcing provision. This is really really, really
Perfect.
backup.
So I'm good with that. As long as we stay on top of that as a town, as to minimize that, I'm good with leaving it in. So that's the only question I had. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Trustee Daly?
We had a very valuable conversation with the community. We're going to go into way more detail later, but to kind of highlight and back up what John was saying, a lot of the questions were regarding policy and procedure. So it makes sense of what is the scenario and how would that play out was exactly kind of the concerns that we received. So we'll talk about those more later. So I appreciate those questions. In addition to that, there are services in this contract that we must have, right? And 2 days is not enough for us to figure out exactly how to do that in our long-term contract. But there are services that the town cannot provide without this provider at this moment. And given that our services will expire in 2 days, I feel like this gap contract with limited services, coverage, those kind of things in a backup need, I think that fits well in order for us to be able to enact and consider all of the considerations from the community and to be able to respond to those and understand, from our perspective, how all of that might work together. So I think this is great. I'm looking forward to hearing from the public about this too, but I appreciate the proactive nature of making sure that we have something on the table to make sure we have services that we need in the town too. So, looking forward to others' comments.
Thank you. Trustee Mason?
I don't have any concerns regarding the temporary contract. I think I did share some of the same concerns that Trustee Gator had, but I think Mr. Sapienza answered those quite well. I did want to point out, I think there's a typo on page 10, paragraph 11, under the bodily injury number. I'm not sure that the comma for that second number is quite in the right place. So just want to point that out. Otherwise, I'm good with what we have here and very much looking forward to the discussion later.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
I don't have any questions or concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Wiegand?
I appreciate the work that they've done on this. We got to have a short-term contract. We can't leave our town defended here. I live over on the east side of the interstate, and we've had some nasty dog bites over there. We had one neighbor of mine had her dog attacked, $2,000 worth of vet bills and getting her put back together again. So there's definitely a need. I understand, our sheriffs can only do so much. So I appreciate you guys putting together the temporary one. We need to have something in place, and I would love to hear the sergeant's opinion on this, how it would help him, what he thinks about how the law or the enforcement part is through the Humane Society, and really getting a good perspective on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Teets?
Thank you for the community members that got together with some of our trustees and sat down and had the roundtable conversation about what would best suit our community compared to one size fits all for all communities. My concern comes from and Patty, you do not have to answer that question in the email. I had the same exact question that I had sent earlier today. So it's definitely something that's weighing on more than just one or two trustees' minds when it comes to define what it comes to when you're serving legal documents. And I think my concern more was who is paying for the preparation of the legal document. If we have a town attorney and we have LCSO, I just didn't see the need to have an additional source providing legal services and writing summons. I don't know if that's like a block where it's a standard summons that gets issued so they don't have to keep contacting legal to rewrite it. So that was one of my questions. I'm looking forward to maybe finding out more details of when that comes back to us later. My want would be to have our code enforcement work with LCSO. But again, I would like to hear what LCSO's schedule looks like handling all these calls. In 2023, we had 187 animal calls, which was concerning to me regarding the contract from NOCO Humane because they estimated 86 calls. And doing the math, it puts us, if we stay on the same trajectory, at 32,212 come 2025. So if we stick with the 180 to 200 calls, we could drastically see this contract more than double come 2025 budget planning. So keeping that in the back of our head as we look at a temporary contract now, but also look at what we're going to really do moving forward. If it's something that we support spending that amount of money on, considering we have LCSO and we could possibly look at bringing on a code enforcement that had the training to handle animals. So those are my only comments, items like that. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have any questions on this. We'll open up for public comment.
Chad Zadina, owner and veterinarian at Tabby Road Animal Hospital. Had a good discussion with John and Rebecca and Dr. Wood Dallas, and then at Hearts and Hooves on Saturday, I guess. about options. I've also been doing a little bit of research, and one, I think the temporary contract seems like a good contract because it's kind of on demand, so we can use them as we need them. I just don't like the fact of handing the reins over to an organization that's a corporation and that you have no oversight over, because once you're there, they're in the town, and we're talking about summons and dog bites. So, I think that the sheriff's office could handle that, honestly, because my friend's a police officer in Eaton, and I said, what do you guys do for animal control there? He says, well, code enforcers take care of it, and the cops, the police department takes care of the vicious dogs and such, and dogs get confiscated. And I told him what we're trying to do here, and his basic thing was, well, that's their job, they do it. It's code enforcement, police officers write the tickets, not some corporate employee that thinks he wants to be a cop, sorry. But that's sort of how I view it. They're not certified police officers writing tickets, so they shouldn't be in that business. I can't go write you a ticket, and I shouldn't be able to, so that's my thoughts on that. And then just, the oversight, I think, is a big thing I have an issue with, is because I think I mentioned before, asked them if we could sit in on the meetings if we're giving them taxpayer money, and they said nope, and even have a town delegate to go sit at meetings. Nope, can't do that. So they're all pretty much self-propelled once we give them money in the contracts. That's what I'm looking at, just have some sort of hybrid model. You can work with our clinic, and I've been called several times, like the house that exploded, I picked those dogs up. Got called to a few accidents. State Patrol calls me periodically to euthanize animals hitting the road. So we do work with them. So it's not just the job of the shelter. And then you were talking about other options, Patty. I've been doing a little bit of research. I've had not much time, but Cheyenne said they'd think about providing us services, as well as Weld County. So there's other options, because it sounds to me like they've got us over a barrel. We're like, oh, we're the only option, and you better do what we say. Like the contract. You think they're not really gonna renew that in 2 months? It's money. They don't care. They're gonna give us another one. You think not?
I don't want to test it.
So don't be scared, fear, don't fear anything. So we can cover it. So I think by sitting down, having a roundtable discussion like we did, we can solve this problem and come out better for everybody. I think they need to be included in the solution, but not the sole solution, because that just kind of loses control over us and has people patrolling the streets and harassing Dr. Wydalis, throwing his ball for his dog. It just doesn't seem right. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Karen Eifert to live in the Knolls. I think also the same thing. I think it's just too much, and we're gonna have somebody come in who's gonna say, well, I'm gonna write this ticket for this, and maybe you as mayor are gonna say, I really don't think that's something that we need to be paying attention to. And also Patty's gonna say, I think this is a little too much, and they're gonna say, well, you already signed the contract, so you have no say. And that's not gonna be right for our citizens, and just signing a contract because you're fearful that you'll never have another way to figure out something else is never a contract you have to sign. And that's not a way to sign. I don't sign my contract when I buy a vehicle because I'm scared I'll never find another vehicle that'll suit what I need. That doesn't make any sense. But everybody used to know Steve, that was the code enforcer before. I always forget his last name. Lafferty was code enforcer. Sorry, I don't know
Talking about
Lafferty's
Steve Norden.
first name. Steve
Norden,
White hair.
the old dog catcher.
He was the code enforcer.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. So he would do that part of it. And then if he needed help, like he did with one of my neighbors, they got into a yelling, fighting match, almost to blows in the front yard. Then he called Larimer County Sheriff's Office. And when LCSO got out there, boy, that neighbor, he should have changed his tone. And he was so nice and kind to that sheriff's officer. And that was in turn very nice to Steve, and everything turned the right way. And it had run that way forever. And Lafferty did things different. And I think is he still out sick? I know he couldn't return back to work, but I don't know if that's still the same thing. But man, that worked for a long, long time. Probably close to 30 years. And there was nothing ever wrong with that. But what I'm saying is there are alternative ways, and those alternative ways should be researched for us, the people who live here. And that should be looked at by our town manager and by our mayor together, not just the town manager making the decision on her own as usual, but it should include this board. And all of those options should be laid out, because there's so many things we can do. And like Chad just said, they're going to come in here and say, oh, well, we don't like how this person's interacting with their dog. We think it's inappropriate. Now you get a ticket. Really? I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right to put that kind of stress on our population and that thought process of one person on the whole community. That's not working for us. That's working for yourself. Include us. Include this board and make the decision after you have looked through all of the options. Don't make it just because, oh, we have 2 days left. So what? There's other options too. Making a decision on just a spur of the moment, I'm scared to see what happens. It's not right. That's just being pressurized. Here, sign the document. I swear I'll be good to you. There's always room for people not being good at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Ed Cannon. I live in Sage Meadows, east side of the highway too, as well. We need animal control. One of the purposes of government is public health and public safety. Loose pets, there's a chance to pick up disease, excuse me, and spread disease. Could be a danger to property, danger to life. You know, dodging a vehicle or running out in the street could cause an accident and so forth. So we need animal control. I like the idea of a temporary contract. It tides us over, gives us a 2-month window to see just how effective this contract is and how Larimer Humane is as well. I'm a dog owner. I've got 2 dogs. I'm very responsible. They don't go outside unless they're on a leash, unless they're in my backyard and it's fenced in. And I heard someone last week talk about winds blow over. Well, in January or late December, my fence blew over. And my first thought was not how to fix the fence, was I'm going to keep my dogs in the backyard when they're out doing their business. So I take them out there with a leash for a couple of days until I got a chance to fix the fence. To me, that's responsible dog ownership. So I like the idea of a 2-month contract. You get a chance to see how it works. Get to see whether or not that is fitting the needs for the community, because you're still going to have to make a decision about what to do after those 2 months. And it gives the board, it gives the community a chance to weigh in and offer their opinions and so forth. You know, one of your tenets of your strategic plan is community engagement, and it's very important to get that community engagement. And so I would encourage you to engage the community, not just a small group of people who are vets and maybe dog lovers or dog owners and so forth, or cat owners. Try a survey, try whatever you can just to get some community input on there. Pets are like part of our family, you know? And to be honest with you, if my pet got out and I got a call from Larimer Humane saying, "We found your dog, we got it here," I would be so relieved to know that the dog's not dead on the side of the road, it hasn't been abducted. And I would do whatever I can to go over there and pick that dog up, no matter what it cost. And I think most pet owners would do the same thing. So thank you. I'd encourage you to go ahead and approve this 2-month contract, use it as a test case. And then it also gives you a couple of months to evaluate some other options. I will say that from a budgetary standpoint, standing up an extra person to do animal control, salary and benefits is probably going to be somewhere between 50 and 60,000, equipping a vehicle, the training and so forth. You know, you've got a $19,000 option under the current contract as opposed to 60. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Board. Sergeant Sherry, Larimer County Sheriff's Office. Just want to kind of address and follow up on an email that I sent to the board regarding my concerns over this contract not being approved and continued. I sent you some numbers, and for the purpose of the audience here, I just want to make sure that we're kind of covering some of those things. On average, over the last 5 years, we had about 165 calls per year. Trustee Teets referenced some numbers from 2023, at 187. Those may have just been calls into our dispatch center where NOCO Humane wasn't actually contacted and dispatched to that call. So I think you referenced, and I'm not sure that exact number, 80 something. Those may have been calls where we reached out to them and asked them to respond based upon whatever we were dealing with at the time. But that 187 is calls into our dispatch center where either a deputy was dispatched to that, or we arrived and we contacted NOCO Humane for that assistance. I relayed to you that I had some concerns just over what that law enforcement would look like in the town of Wellington. As you know, Jim Lafferty used to deal with a lot of these things where we would just respond for emergencies, where there was a vicious animal or something along those lines that were well outside of Jim's capabilities. But our training in these things is very limited. Colorado revised statutes requires that law enforcement through the Colorado Dog Protection Act, that we have to receive a certain level of training, but that level of training is just to mitigate or minimize deputies showing up on scene and having to use any type of lethal force or deadly force against a vicious animal. Because prior to that, we just didn't have a lot of training. Our training is very limited to trying to contain or as a last resort, using deadly force, and that's not something that I or any of my deputies want to do. One of the things that we just don't get involved in is a lot of the loose dogs that run through the streets. I don't have the capability. I'm getting old to be chasing dogs down. But even some of my young guys, we don't have catch poles. We don't have any of these tools to be able to capture and contain an animal. So we need some other solution to be able to collect this animal and transport it and have it properly housed. We just don't have the capabilities or a place to do that. 9 times out of 10, when a citizen calls in and says, hey, I've captured this animal, it's in my garage, we have to call NOCO Humane to come pick up that animal because it's just not something we do. My time is up, so I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Back to the board. Any further comments from the board? Trustee Daly.
We'll talk about this more in detail too. A lot of the concerns and questions I've heard from public comment regarding whether or not to adopt a contract are related to enforcement, A, but B, the parts that they're enforcing are our ordinances. So from my experience, and this is what I would love to jump into further and with more community engagement, it's not necessarily whether or not something should be enforced or not, right? Or how they're enforcing it. That's the question here, but it's whether or not we believe in the ordinances that we have that we're asking them to enforce. Because suddenly it looks like NOCO Humane is doing all these unreasonable items that we have written in our code. So I want to make sure as we're talking through this and in the future, but specifically related to this contract that's before us, that we are separating both the services contract versus the ordinances that we have. Those are 2 separate comments and subjects, both that we can address as a board and both that require community feedback, but they are separate. One just calls upon the other. So we need to make more considerations for that because a lot of the incidents and situations that we've heard from in public comment have indicated that that might not be fair. Well, that's what's in our ordinance though. That's not up to NOCO Humane. So I want to talk about that further too. The other public comment that hasn't come to our board, but is loud, is worth mentioning, is we do have lost or loose dogs all the time, especially in windy seasons. And just recently, there was an incident where there was public outrage associated to dogs at large by hundreds of residents. So I do want to notate that as much as some very responsible dog owners, not saying that dogs at large aren't responsible owners either. Scenarios happens, fences blow over and you have no idea. But there's a thought of my dog's really well trained. So therefore, these rules shouldn't apply to me, right? And those are our rules, this town's rules that we need to talk about. Versus there are loose dogs and those rules should apply to those. So I just want to be super cautious that if I were to see a loose dog in the street, I would not have the premonition to know that this is a kind dog, this is a mean dog, this is a sad dog, this is a well-trained dog. I don't know. I've never met that dog before in my life. But someone who does have the ability and capability to work with and understand dogs better are those who have very specific training to do so and the tools to do it safely. Public safety is the top, or one of our responsibilities, right? And based on the hundreds of people with outrage for a dog at large, if we as a board were to say, we're not going to provide those services or secure those to make sure that we have them for the town of Wellington, I think that would be irresponsible. So I do want to notate that too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I think this is going to give us the 2 months that we need to really explore how we need to further this program here. We're going to have an opportunity to get the community input, to look at the ordinance, maybe what we can tweak some. So, 2 months, that's going to take some of the pressure off the sheriff's office during that time, and then we can get it honed down good. So I think we need to go ahead and get her done.
Please.
So I am totally for the interim agreement. I don't think that anyone on our board wants to see anyone getting attacked by loose animals. Yeah, so I'm for this.
Perfect. Trustee Gator?
Yeah, and I agree. I think the statements made tonight are worth looking into. Don't want to go into, we're going to have further conversation. So I am supportive of the 2-month agreement. I just want to make sure, are we all in agreement? Really, we want to see as a board enforcement is really handled by town unless for whatever reason we can't. And is that an okay thing? I just want to make sure that we're clear on that from a staff standpoint, that our goal is town and LCSO does it. If we can't, okay, but our goal is primarily we do it if we possibly can, and just that's my only ask from the staff is as we're going through this, we try to keep that as much as possible.
I think that's what's written in the
Great.
contract.
I just wanted to make sure we're
Okay.
all clear.
Yeah. And then, Mayor Bartem, did you have any final comments?
I do. I just have one quick final comment about what the impact would be to our workers' comp insurance, by taking on this responsibility in-house versus not. So, and that Patty can follow up with that at a later date, because I'm sure that by us providing animal control services in-house versus contracting it out, there's going to be an impact there. So I'd be just curious to know what that would look like for us, in the future.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement that we need to have coverage, and this gives us a good time frame to start figuring things out to get down to what we really want, what we really need, how to move forward best. Perfect. Do I hear a motion on this item?
I make a motion to approve resolution number 07-2024, approving a temporary agreement for animal welfare services.
I second it.
One point, do we need to have the
Yeah,
effective
do we
dates in
need-
the motion? I know it's in the contract, but do we need to have the dates in the motion for the temporary agreement? We just didn't add the dates, so could we maybe just amend the motion to include the dates?
And this is one thing that I would ask that the board clarify. Does the motion to approve entail the approval of the resolution number 07-2024, approving an agreement with NOCO Humane for animal welfare services effective February 1, 2024 to March 31, 2024, or some other specified stipulation? I just wasn't quite clear on the motion there.
It's
we're all in
moved to
agreement.
approve the resolution number 07-2024, approving an agreement with NOCO Humane for animal welfare services effective February 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2024. Is that?
Thank you.
Perfect.
I second.
Mr. Clerk, can I get a roll call, please?
Trustee Teets,
Yes.
trustee Wiegand,
Yes.
trustee Mason,
Yes.
trustee Gator,
Yes.
trustee Daly,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald,
Yes.
Mayor Shosse.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously and resolution number 07-2024 is approved.
Thank you. Okay, and now we will move on to board reports, which will be Trustee Gator and Trustee Daly. Go for it.
Did you want to start or did you want me to start, Trustee Daly? Okay.
I do have to apologize. I could only attend for the first half of the meeting. I had a frozen bicycle emergency. If you want more details on that later, I'll tell you more. Everybody was fine. Okay, so there were three major categories or items that I kind of organized this way as the generalized feedback of what happened or what we talked about. These are the three categories. One of them was regarding cost. Okay. Second was procedure, policy, those kind of type of category of questions. And then the third one is what services do we need, want, have to have? So I'll start first with costs. There are some, and this kind of goes back to policy and procedure as well. There was some feedback regarding the cost of the contract and the cost of the services that were provided, that they were more services than required. So for example, cremating a dog versus, or an animal, I keep saying dogs, keep thinking dogs. Cremating an animal versus like landfill type options. One's much more expensive than the other. And then, so is there value in requiring one over the other? And if their only option was to do one versus the other, is that the right choice? So that was one of the questions. A couple other questions that I had an opportunity to kind of look into the contract further and kind of answer myself, but we also have some follow-up items to come as well, is regarding, there was concerns about cremating animals that weigh over a certain weight amount, if there's extra charge for that. And those are kind of those kind of services that you would go to NOCO Humane for, to say, I'm bringing my dog here to be euthanized and cremated. They charge certain rate based off those criteria that they might have there, but not for those associated with the town of Wellington type contract things. So there's things that were considered extra costs that aren't necessarily. So I was able to check off a couple of those off my list that wasn't necessarily the case, and a concern for the cost of the contract itself, other than the overall costs of the contract based on some of those services that maybe were more than needed. So the other parts of the costs were if we're already contributing to the county, mill levy, those kind of items, then why, would we need a contract above and beyond that? I think that will be a pretty clear answer to be able to indicate that, but that was a question that was repeated. So those are some of the things related to costs. The other in general question is, we already have code enforcement, we have LCSO. So the question was, again, why the extra cost? I think there is significant value into these kind of services, but I think it would be really helpful, as we touched on tonight, of what responsibility of what lies, maybe have a couple scenarios. I think that speaks to people well. And then understand where the limits and tools, training, and those kind of things, where those limits are within those services as well. I would like to be able to see kind of not a matrix, I'm not saying let's map it out, but kind of a better understanding, so we have a more holistic view of what is it that we're paying for that is worth it to pay for those services. So I think the understanding the value, I think, would be helpful to understand what we're paying for. I think that would put a lot of people at ease and also provide an extra opportunity for feedback and alternatives. So that was costs, procedure, and enforcement. So we've had claims and we have heard in here tonight, actually, between the email received from Sergeant Cherry and some of the public feedback we've received, is a variety of experiences that they've had with NOCO Humane. Some of them, tone may not have been very friendly. Other ones really considered very professional and masters of their expertise. So there is a wide range of a kind of feedback in the way they're presented, and then the actual way that they operate, their policies and procedure. I would love to be able to have maybe a little bit more background from NOCO Humane of, this is our policy, this is our procedure, this is how we operate under these circumstances, or this is what we see often and this is how we treat it. Because in cases where they maybe didn't have a very friendly experience, they also weren't even ticketed. So it is a perspective item of how I feel I would like to interact with this person versus the enforcement side of it. I think those are two separate things. So what is our policy? What's our procedure? How do they operate? And that'll help us understand, do we want that or not? I think those are great questions, and those are a lot of those things that came up in that community feedback. And then what services do we actually need and want? That was the major thing. Because people who work in the animal industry have a lot of knowledge on how things work or what they offer or what other partners that they know in the community offer. That was enlightening to me. I didn't know that. I didn't know hearts to hooves, or hooves and hearts.
I have the card. Horses.
Oh, okay. I thought there was going to be a heart in there somewhere. There's another heart one. Okay. Oh, I volunteered there. That's why I'm getting them all mixed up. Okay. I'm a horse person personally, just so you know, that's my background. That they will pick up roadkill. I didn't know that. And they do it at a very small fee, and they do it in the county all over the place. So I didn't know we had other alternates to some of the services. So my question, when hearing all the feedback of different alternates and options and feedback from the community, was, what are we obligated to provide? What are those are classified under nice to have versus public safety? What are those that are nice to have public safety liability? I would love to know, with all the pieces and components of that contract, you know, what category those maybe lie within. Because if we're obligated, of course, for public safety purposes or liability purposes, like the Mayor Pro Tem McDonald brought up of liability concerns or insurance concerns, I like to know how those pieces kind of build into that. So that was the other thing, is, do we really even need enforcement? That came up a lot of times. And in the cases in those scenarios that came up, I don't think we did. But in other cases that I've heard about, and then what people are very scared about online a lot, we do need some type of enforcement or care or support or help or whatever the case might be. I happen to have caught dogs the other day that were on the loose all day long, apparently. I found out later on. I happen to be a dog whisperer. I grew up with horses. This is just the thing you have, and you know dogs really well. Caught them my first try. I didn't realize how amazing it was until after the fact when I researched it, but not regular citizens can do that. And they don't know if those dogs are friendly. And if within their best intentions, they end up getting bit during that just by a scared dog, that would be really sad. That would be somebody who got hurt, a dog that kind of got traumatized, probably more than it needed to be. And then who knows, maybe I lost the life of that dog for that situation. So, I think there's a lot to talk about. I got tons of things, but those are the three categories I heard. Trustee Gator did a lot more in brainstorming how to answer those questions. And I think that's super valuable, but I think between that and maybe our staff and legal feedback as well, we need to marry all that together, see general consensus also within the community, maybe polls of what kind of services they would want to have. I mean, if my dog got loose, I want it back as fast as possible. So there's a lot to talk about, but those were the categories of what I heard for feedback.
Perfect. So basically the way we kind of broke it out was I took the first portion of the meeting and just kind of let people share, what are your concerns? You know, what are the issues, right? And then what I did is the second half, I said, okay, let's actually sit down and talk about solutions. And so I actually recorded that. I let everyone know. So I was like, hey, we're going to record this once we're talking solutions. So I will email that over to Mr. Sapienza along with kind of my notes from everything, and then he can forward that out to the rest of the board. And so that way, I kind of told them there's two ways, because a lot of what came out of, like, Trustee Daly had said, is a lot of it was it's hassle, it's expensive, it's frustrating to deal with it. There were concerns. Mr. Zadinas shared that this evening, the concerns about, you know, a corporation coming in and doing enforcement, that he has concerns around that and them having authority. And, you know, yes, there's contracts, but they're not directly liable. So like in both cases, if you think about enforcement in the town, our code enforcement officer is accountable to the town administrator, who is accountable to the board of trustees, who are elected officials. So ultimately, they're accountable to elected officials. LCSO is accountable to Sergeant Cherry, who's accountable to Sheriff Fan, who is an elected official. So in all cases, right now, enforcement is done by people who are accountable to the elected representatives of the people, whether that be the sheriff or whether that be the town board. And so there were concerns on, okay, if we're going to turn this enforcement over to this unelected body, there were a lot of concerns around that. Then again, concerns, it was brought up several times. Hey, Wellington's had the code enforcement officers handled this before. That's typically something they'll have to handle animal stuff. Yes, when it gets like vicious dogs and things like that, there needs to be another level of handling that. You're right, it was Hearts and Hooves.
Oh.
Yeah, Hearts and Hooves is the name I've written right here. Sorry. And that, so that was some of the concerns. Just going through. I think that was the big thing in just making sure. The other concern that kind of was brought up is, have we really looked into this? Have we evaluated other options? I know Mr. Zadina shared that a little bit tonight in his public comment. Are there other entities that would be willing to do things? Hearts and Hooves, who came in and talked about that, said that there were some different options that they could provide services for. So those were kind of the concerns aspect. One of the things that Trustee Daly mentioned, that was one of the things that brought up, was that NOCO Humane typically does cremation, which typically the cost of that is, I think they said somewhere between $500+ an animal to cremate, whereas they have ways of doing burial. They have specific sites at the landfill that are meant for animals to do burial, where the cost, it sounds like, they didn't give us an exact number, but it sounds like somewhere between $50 and $100. So there's a pretty big difference. So if you start to think about, okay, what makes up that 19,000? Well, if we're paying for cremations, that may be a large number of that 19,000. Let's see. There was also questions raised about, are there extra charges? And I know that's been raised by Trustee Teets multiple times, but that was also raised by members of the community. So kind of moving into the kind of solutions that we came out to. So basically, I'm going to break it down into two different solutions. So the first solution, which was definitely the one that was pushed more by the members of the community, is they really want to see us as a town and community working together and have us handle most of that. And so what their thought process on that really looked at is, hey, you know, we've got vets, we've got people with training that, hey, if there's a loose dog, that someone can find it and we can let them know and get that to the vet and they can store it and get a hold of the owner. They said in the case of strays, try to handle that internally, whether that's LCSO helping or whether that's our town enforcement officer, whether it's just citizens saying, hey, I saw a dog out, you know, let me get this over to the vet. And like Trustee Daly did this last week, right? Can they get that done? If there's corpse in the town, Hearts and Hooves, they were willing to do that. So they can do it two different ways. So one way that they do it is you can just literally text them, here's where the body is, and within 24 hours, they'll come and pick it up. The other option is you can have someone who comes and picks it up, whether it's someone just grabs it, they put it in a bag. And then I know Mr. Zadina said he'd possibly be willing. He has a freezer at his facility where he could just store it. And you store it in that freezer. They have like specific bags that are for corpses of animals. And then when that's full, then have someone come out and pick up those corpses. And so it's less expensive because you're not paying them to come out every time, you just store it. And that's something where potentially staff could handle that and they just come out with gloves, you pick it up, put it in the bag, and then just transport it and have somewhere in town to store it. And again, their idea was you don't necessarily need to buy any new equipment because you have resources in town that might be willing to work with the town. Obviously, there's going to be a cost, right? If we're going to use their freezer, there will be some cost number associated with that. I don't know what that would be to store that, and then we could remove that. So that would deal with dead animals, which is one of the things that we would need. And then what they said is that if there is that vicious animal, that we then have that standby contract with someone like NOCO Humane. They also said sometimes there are other professionals that specialize in animals that are vicious that potentially you could have contracts with them. Now, they did say with those, you'd have to make sure, obviously, do they have all the right insurances and everything and the background and training and all that. So there's things you have to check. So it's not just like, hey, I do this. Okay, well, I'm not gonna take your word for it. But whether that's NOCO Humane or somebody else, but then they come out on those vicious animal calls, which are not a large, I don't know the percentages and we can, I'm sure, find those out. But that's not a majority of our calls is the vicious animal. So you don't necessarily need that highest level of training per se, was their thought process. And then, let's see, that was strays, vicious deceased. The other thing that they brought up, I know one of the other issues, it was a time that if someone is arrested by LCSO and they have animals in the house. And I don't know how that works in the rest of the county, but they had brought up, well, typically if the sheriff's office is going to be arresting someone, it's their responsibility to make sure that the animal is taken care of, whether that's NOCO Humane or they transport it or something like that. Again, I don't know how our contract works. I don't know how that works in the rest of the county, but that was what was brought up. So that was kind of their one option, which was just basically maybe we have them to help us with vicious animal, but otherwise we try to work together as community. And again, I'll have more detailed on this, but I want to try and keep it pretty high level. The second one, which I asked them, I said, okay, that's great, but I know the board's kind of thought process is, okay, we've been presented a contract. There were some concerns that were raised with that. How can we make that work? So if we say, hey, we're going to continue working with NOCO Humane, what changes need to be made? And the two big things that they had requested on that really stemmed down to keep it on something that's more of an as-needed basis. They did not like the patrols, having them out here just patrolling the town. They did not like that. But having it to be something where staff needs like, hey, can you come out for this? We need you to come out for that. And then the other piece of that is they did not like the enforcement. So they would prefer enforcement stays with either the town or with LCSO, but not having that be a part of the contract with NOCO Humane. So those were that's again, I'll type it all up. There'll be more to it than that, but that was kind of the gist of it. So either, hey, can we try to partner up with some of the other resources that we have? And that was the other thing too. They said is like, hey, people that live here in the town, they know more. They know what's going on in the town. And a lot of cases, I think Mr. Zadina had shared when Trustee Daly brought the dogs in, his staff recognized the dogs because they've seen the dogs, they've worked. So it becomes something where it's not the hassle of the owner has to then drive to South Loveland. They can come to one of the vets in Wellington and pick up their pets. And it just makes it easier. And it's, hey, it's the community taking care of the community. Was kind of their thought process around it. So, and then I think that's about it. I'm happy to answer questions that you guys have. Like I said, I'll share the recording that'll have kind of their laying out different options. But I think that's the highlights.
Thank you, both of you, for taking the time to do that and everybody that met with you. Do we have questions on that, or we just want to wait for the emails to come through?
I don't have questions. I just have one.
Oh, okay, go for it. Trustee Teets.
So I'm grateful because that is part of the strategic plan is increasing engagement and communication with local businesses. If we have an opportunity to provide funding to a local business over, out of, or in the county, that would be amazing. Reality sets in that you get used to it just being comfortable and having one place offer all of the resources that makes it possible to make one call to handle everything. That's the only thing where I could really see the pushback in is it's amazing that you have these businesses that are willing to step forward, but what happens when that business closes? How do you secure additional contracts? What if the next vet office is not interested in partnering or pairing with the town? So I think that I love the ideas moving forward. If we can make this work and it works out successfully, that's great. But we have to also look into the long future. It might be an awesome service now, but is it going to be an office service 5 years from now? And will the contract still be available from somebody else? So I think those are all things that we might have to take into account. And Patty, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but they were not, they meaning NOCO, Humane, were not interested in an ad hoc contract after March, correct?
That is correct.
So it is a take it or leave it kind of contract.
So we have two options after March 31st. We can go with this contract, or they can provide this secondary contract if we have our own animal control services. So similar to Eaton and Windsor. Actually, it's just Eaton and Johnstown it is. Actually, they have their own police departments. So they provide their own animal control services. And so they use NOCO Humane as that backup service, not as the first line of sight, essentially. So those backup services are generally used by municipalities that have their own police department on site, that have the trucks available and the backup for those types of services and calls.
Got it. So this would be comparing kind of apples to oranges when you look at it, because we don't have those trucks and we do not have a police force.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. And I'm not against pursuing this further. It's just knowing and understanding the pros and cons moving forward of everything that we're looking at and what those contracts look like over extended periods of time. If they're going to continue and they can offer a 3-year contract, they're going to be around in 3 years, great. If this is something where they might not be around in a year, then we're making town staff scurry to try and find additional providers for the services that a company was providing. So that's the only thing I'd say to also consider in this roundabout of thing is understanding both sides. If we can make it work, awesome. If we can't, then we need additional options. But thank you for meeting with the community.
Yeah, a
Thank you.
major thing I kind of missed out was the accountability piece. There's so many questions on costs, procedure, policy. So I guess the question was, sure, that's how they say it's supposed to work, but if it's not happening that way, how do we provide feedback and accountability that it is going to be? So a lot of those, it's just trust questions, right? Of that's how they say they're going to do it. What if it's not happening that way? Then what happens? And that's come from the community too, of how do we give them feedback? How are we present within their board? Those kind of things. So I think if we have a mechanism, and I know within the contract, it does provide information on feedback, quarterly reports, all those kind of things. So I think maybe if we had a little bit more visibility on that too, it might be helpful to really understand how they would be accountable, what they would be reporting on exactly. I think that would be helpful to know too.
I had one more question. Can we get, and I know I'd asked this before, can we get a fee schedule? It's the only thing that was not provided to us is,
Thought it said paid quarterly.
No, just a fee schedule of the extra costs. If there's been the questions of the 500 per animal or 50 to 100 or.
So none of those are applicable. All costs are included. Those questions regarding, extra cost for this, extra cost for that, it was like more of a cost savings question for value of maybe if they didn't offer this service, they wouldn't have to charge us so much,
And-
like if they weren't cremating. But those additional costs are like if you take your dog to NOCO, personally, you take it there and you say, I'd like to cremate my dog.
Yeah. Those
They
are
would charge you for that.
owner incurred costs.
Yeah, versus
it.
them being
Not
incurred
counted.
coming from our contract, our.
Okay,
type of
I
thing.
thought you
Yeah.
had said that was the additional and I was like, wait a minute.
No, they were saying that they could be saving money if they made other choices. And also $500, that's exorbitant. That's not how much they would charge at all, just so you know. I think that's how maybe some private places do
Yeah.
potentially, but that's much higher than, if you look at NOCO Humane on their website, they do have costs for certain services. That would be if you personally were utilizing their services as an individual, not as us from a town perspective.
Right, and that's what I was kind of
Okay.
asking on was the town's perspective of that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So all of ours is included in the contract though, because that keeps coming up of what extra. And every single time I've researched those options, it's all included.
Patty, is it all included or are you still looking into
It-
those items?
It's all included, and on their website, they have they have listed out the cost for various things. So, they have listed a cat euthanasia is $60, a dog euthanasia is $80, a small mammal or other is 30. Impound fees are $40 to $60 depending on the municipality. Boarding fee per day is $15. So they have, those would be the owner costs. And as far as additional costs, we've talked about what it would cost if somebody got summoned into court. And Dan, would you like to address that?
In most of these situations, a summons is, when LCSO writes a summons, it's the same form as on a ticket. And so in the enforcement action, it would be essentially violation of X code, here's your summons. It's a piece of paper, it's a form. There's not really an additional cost on that. It's part of the services they provide. And, there's no additional fees paid to NOCO Humane to writing a summons.
I don't think
The
that was,
contract talks about, and this is something you had brought up before, the contract talks about a town's police services will commission officers of the Humane Society. And that was not included in the costs. But commissioning would be a function of Laramie County Sheriff's Office saying, giving the animal control officer the authority to perform those acts, and that would be presumably included in our LCSO contract. So it's, there's not additional cost paid to NOCO Humane. All of those are included.
for the summons and everything like that.
Yeah, it's.
And
writing a
for
piece-
them writing the summons, that's
it's
all,
part of enforcement. There's nothing in the contract that would be a separate fee.
okay.
Mr. Bean?
One thing I would like to see you guys do, and I know you're probably already, is including the Laramie County Sheriffs on any and all discussions at this point. Because, if we're throwing more at them, we're wanting them to do so much more around our community with the school and all the other type of stuff. We don't want to take away from that. So, yeah, make sure you include.
Thank you. Trustee Gator, anything final?
Yeah, so just, I guess, kind of moving back into kind of my own thoughts on kind of best steps moving forward. I think Trustee Media Daily made a great point. We need to understand what are we required to, from a public health and safety, what are the things that we need to do? Because then I think it gives us the ability, and I think that we really need to sit down and look at, okay, you know, what are there other options? Is Cheyenne actually willing to come up here? Is Weld willing to come up here? If they are, what are they going to charge us for transportation? Like I'm sure there's going to be costs because those places, I mean, south of Loveland's not close either. They're not close to here. So I think we need to understand kind of what are the different options that are available. And then really, I think for me, the biggest sticking point on this is it comes down to the enforcement piece. I really don't like the patrols. I don't like I prefer enforcement is done by the government agent, right? We make the laws, we should be the ones enforcing them, not putting that off onto a private company to enforce the laws. I think they're also, and I don't know how this falls into our discussion of chapter 10, because technically I think animal falls under a different chapter. I know we're already talking about changing a couple of things within that, but I think that this is one of the things that we do need to look at. And again, that needs to be a discussion. I think that whether we do that at a work session where we open up public comment, but we need to have those conversations because I agree there's people on both ends of it, right? There are people that have been attacked by an animal that they don't want to see dogs running around. I had somebody else was talking, I don't remember who, but mentioned it while we were there Saturday, that I think it's Breckenridge or there's some town up in the mountains where they have their laws, your dog just has to be under control. That could be voice control. And he said their people are dogs on off a leash and it's not a problem. They don't have issues with it. But again, that doesn't mean that right, just because they do that in another town doesn't mean that's right for Wellington. So I think that, like Trustee Daly said, right, the answer is not, okay, don't enforce it. Like, if we're saying you shouldn't be enforcing the law, we need to be asking the question, is this the right law to have? Because if we're not willing to say you should enforce the law, might not be a good law, or we need to talk about should there be parameters around that. So again, I don't know how we tie that in, but I think that's a bigger question that we have to address because that's our job, right? Is we have to set what those ordinances and laws are. But I think that we need to be able to hear from people on both ends of that. We've heard from people on one side of that, which has been very helpful, but I think there also needs to be the people that are on the other end of it, because right, there's a reason we have laws that say you're not allowed to have a dog off a leash, you're not allowed to do this, and it's never because someone's dog was playing ball peacefully in the yard, right? It was always because someone's dog went and did something it shouldn't have done. So I think that we need to work through that. I would really like to, I think we need to look at paring down the services piece because like Trustee Daly said, the contract we have is all inclusive. So there's all these things that we don't pay extra for that because we're paying for it in the 19,000, because that was one of the things that was brought up. We paid, I think it was 3,000 2 years ago. We paid about $7,000 last year for animal control. And now we're going from 7 to 19,000. And that's because we're now paying for patrols in the area. We're paying for, you know, everything, right? Everything that you can think of that happens. The NOCO humane person writes a summons. Now they have to come to court, right? That's tied into that $19,000 that we're paying, is paying for their time to be sitting in court and going through that process, right? Those are all things that make up those $19,000. And so I'd really like to see if we can maybe whittle that down to say, okay, we really don't need this. We can adjust this, or maybe figuring out some way to blend it together to say, okay, we can't do all of these things ourselves, but are there some small things that we can say, we don't need this done, we don't need this done, and then pare it down. So that's kind of where I'd like to see us try to come to, is just figuring out exactly what has to happen and what can we do. And I understand it's not easier, right? It does make it easier when you just say, okay, one person, you do everything, I don't have to think about it. Yes, that does make it easy. And sometimes that is the right answer, but it's not always the right answer. The easiest way isn't always the best way to do it. And so I think we just need to do our due diligence and say, okay, let's look at some different options and see what is the best option. And it may be the best option is we just go with it as it was presented and we just say, this is really the best thing that we need to do. But I think at this point, we just need to, that would address some of the other concerns too that were brought up. Is, again, I know we've talked about this several times at work sessions, so it wasn't new to, well, the contract was new to us, right? We didn't see the contract till just before the meeting, but the idea was not a new thing to us because we'd been talking about it through budget, but it was like we didn't know how implementation was going to work out. But then I think a lot of residents weren't looking for that specific thing in the budget process. So to a lot of them, it felt like this was a last minute thing. And it's like, whoa, what are you doing? This is changing everything. So I think that by doing this and kind of giving ourselves a little bit more time to go through that, it allows us now, obviously, if people don't tune into the meetings, then they'll still not know about it. But at least we've kind of had those conversations, open up those opportunities for people to hear. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we've all made a lot of good points. I mean, Trustee Teets on the longevity of if we go outside of the Humane Society, what does that look like? Obviously, we need to address ordinances or look at them and see what's going to work best for us. But yeah, I think, you know, listening to the public, taking into account what they have, talking to the sheriff's department, all of them and us kind of figuring that out, I think is a great way to do it. Question is how do we go about that? I think maybe a survey of sorts to send out to, you know, our residents, maybe a great way to reach them. I don't know as though a round table per se is really feasible without Mahala here and the staffing issues we're facing there.
Send that with a survey in front of the post office.
We could put
I'm
you in a
willing
dog
to
suit
put-
without a collar and have
I-
that,
I'm
yeah.
Willing to put boots to the ground and go to some public places and ask people if they'd like to complete a survey.
Yeah,
I know that survey formation might be a bit more difficult to list and put online, but if.
yeah, something, I mean,
It shouldn't be hard to put, again, and I think we need to be careful because I know a lot of times we as government, we love to make things complicated.
right,
We should make it a super simple, like open-ended, like, okay, like 3 or 4 questions, like super easy, like this, and then an open spot for share your comments. And then what I think we do is we put the onus on the people that are concerned about this and say, hey, we're going to take some public comment. We're going to create this survey. We'll have it on the website. We'll share it on social media. Your job now, as the concerned member of the community who really wants the community voice to be heard, let people know if they need to fill this out. Or talk to one of your elected officials. I know any of us are happy to get emails from people, and I know a lot of us even meet with people and residents who have concerns. And I think that at that point, if we've put that out there, again, something simple, it literally should not take more than a few minutes to put together the survey. If it's taking us hours to do this, we're doing something wrong.
right.
And then that allows us to capture that feedback. And then all of us as, I think, elected officials just being willing to say, yes, I'm willing to talk with any residents. If you want to email me or get together with me or whatever that looks like for each of us individually, I think if we're willing to say that, we've done our part. And then it's on the community. If the community chooses not to engage, we gave them that opportunity and we made it as accessible as we could. But if they do choose to engage, then we get the feedback and then we can bring that into the conversation.
Is there a way to do a QR code for the link so we can hang up some posters at the dog park? You know, just a QR code that you put that'll take you directly to the link so people at the dog
Oh.
park can just scan it and.
Yeah, yeah, you can make a QR code like free on Google.
That's a great idea. I think maybe if we're just saying a very simple survey with subjective, free fill text type responses,
Yeah.
just so we can read all the responses, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think, and then we'll let the fine people who have done these things a million times figure out all the details, but that's great. That's a great idea, especially at the dog park.
I think that'd be the fastest, easiest way to get the feedback we're looking for. So yeah, you guys have the direction you're looking for on this?
Sure. So I'll get with staff tomorrow. We'll figure out, I mean, the survey questions have to be clear and they have to be able to be quickly answered and they need to make sense. Make sure we're getting the responses back that we need the information on, or
Yeah.
that you all need the information on. So that will take a little bit of thought.
I think,
on that. It shouldn't take hours, but it will take a little bit of time to make sure that we are hitting the mark. I will let you know the timeline for that after I meet with my team tomorrow so that you know kind of what to expect. We had tabled the original resolution to February 13th. What I would like to do is potentially just continue that until the first meeting in March. February 20th. Hold on, let me pull up my calendar. Hold on, I will tell you. February 20th, we have our Economic Development 101 for the work session, and then we can tag on after that talking about what those if we have those survey results back, you all can talk about that. We can see if NOCO Humane is available to come and talk about how they handle enforcement, how they handle those calls and things like that. Some of the questions that you all, or comments you all talked about tonight, see if they're available to come, one or both, to make a presentation.
Yeah, and then I'd like to get LCSO on that for
Absolutely. You bet.
their,
Absolutely. Yeah, internally, we've been copying each other on emails and things like that, so they're aware of what comments are being made by the public and things like that. So we're all on the same boat,
perfect.
on the same paper trail.
Great. If I might ask of the board,
Oh.
given the tight timeline, oh, sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald, did you have she had her hand raised?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for a quick opportunity for some comments and follow-up, and just maybe a request for a little bit additional direction to staff. I guess I would be really curious and encourage Sursa to get engaged in this conversation, because really I'm really curious and concerned about the financial impacts of taking on that additional liability of having to have additional coverage to provide animal control services for a staff member, the insurance liability to store those dogs, like who is responsible for that dog, why it's being transported, dog dies, or something happens to that animal during transportation, who incurs that cost. And if we're working with community partners, and the town is, taking on that responsibility through code enforcement, that's, I'm very concerned and curious about what, we're trying to be very budget conscious, and this could have a very significant impact to our budget when we're trying to balance public safety priorities and wants versus needs. The cost of a contract through Larimer County Sheriff's Office may result in, that this is far more cost effective than what it's going to take for us to stand it up with workers' comp, outfitting our code enforcement official to be able to handle taking on an animal, providing the liability to safely transport and handle the animal until it's being picked up, all of those things. So really, I really want to know what Sursa has to say about this and that financial impact before we consider taking this on as an additional responsibility of a code enforcement officer, because I think very separate things. Thank you.
We can put that together for the work session on the 20th.
Perfect. Thank you, Member Pro Tem. Sorry to interrupt you.
I was just saying, since it's a very short timeline, I was wondering if we could get permission or direction from the board that John and I continue to be kind of point people on this project as we move forward, just so we can make sure if there's any feedback required or anything that's needed, that we could maybe respond quicker than do that, if that's good with everybody. I'm happy to continue.
Yeah,
serving.
I mean, you guys, yeah,
Okay.
have you guys run the whole thing.
Let's go.
Perfect.
We'll be the data gatherers for the
Yeah.
board. Sounds
Great.
good.
Perfect. Okay. Good discussion, guys. Having no further business, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Clerk, negative roll call, please.
Trustee Gator,
Yes.
trustee Teets,
Yes.
trustee Daly,
Yes.
trustee Mason,
Yes.
trustee Wiegand,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald,
Yes.
Mayor Shosse.
Yes,
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
thank you. I now adjourn the January 30th, 2024 special meeting, time being 7:47 PM.